My name is David Pinto, and I'd like to talk about what I've termed zero social distance. This is possibly the hardest thing to talk about. And so I am going to take, well, my time, and because you're watching this, your time. It might be useful to look at the other aspects and the other systems so you can make sense of this. Zero social distance is a new term. Social distance became a term in 2020 because of the coronavirus. And it is the one thing globally which we are facing, we have faced across all cultures and societies globally. And it has caused major disruption to all our economic, political, and commercial activities, and our religious practices have been influenced, altered. And the notion of social distance and the imposed isolation by everybody has meant that when the vaccine is developed and we go back to some semblance of normality regarding our social engagement, where we can hug freely our friends, family, we shall return to cinemas, to restaurants, to workplaces, and to greet people on the street. Will we return to the time we had before, which was to pass by people in the street and not really acknowledge them? How long will it take to return to this? A week? A month? Where we just are negligent of the people around us, because most of us live in cities. And in order to actually get anything done, we had to crowd with other people in streets, buses, trains. And we just have to ignore people. However, there's a possibility that we could make use of the experience we've had, this involuntary isolation, to consider various peoples throughout history who have self-isolated. And they have done this in order to come to terms, to practice, to appreciate their own existence. And the living conditions of a monk very similar to the living conditions of a prisoner. It's just that one chooses it and the other one hasn't. To live in a cell, to remove distractions, to not be overly concerned with external reality, with the look of things, taste of things, the sound of things. Now, my practice has been minimal throughout my life, I have to say. I have had a tendency to Buddhism. I've never been a Buddhist, and I've never joined any particular group, political or religious. However, I have appreciated, in the same way that I've appreciated some maths, I've appreciated language, and fantasy, and science fiction, I've appreciated the theories and the practices involved in education, and I have to say I haven't really appreciated the business practices very much. But I have appreciated people attempting to work together. And in academia, I find it a blessing that we can actually read the words written by the finest minds that we have produced in the world. The amazing technology of script. To read Descartes, 1637, translated. I don't read the original, but translated, it sounds as fresh as it was written. Cogito ergo sum. It is remarkable. His discourse on methods, remarkable. 1637. And regarding our religious, our spiritual leaders throughout history, again, I have not done a massive amount of reading of this. In fact, I haven't done virtually any. However, I have come across a few texts that have, in fact, 3 texts that have been influential in my life. And they might be useful for us. And I'm going to read some of these texts. I might go into detail on another. I might go through this section. But the way I understood texts, spiritual guidance, is that they are describing some aspect of their experience which is phenomenologically, i.e. experientially, existentially, interesting to them. And they're attempting to share that with other people. And by sharing that, it might actually help people improve their quality of life and their social engagement. And the interpretation and translation of various gurus throughout life, throughout the world, has taken different form in different cultures. But I think they're all kind of the same. They're talking about our experience, and that's why they have applicability. Now, when I came up with this term, I'm definitely not an enlightened person. I'm not a guru. I'm not a spiritual leader. Zero social distance. I might even say zero self distance. The reason why I'm sharing this is because there are a couple of techniques that I've found that I think might be useful. Like the other techniques that I've used for the economics, or maths, or fantasy, or in academia, reflexive reading, ABC, state and education, action cycles in business, execute in mathematics. This refers to a potential spiritual direction, normally monopolized by religions. Religions, I think if the origin of the word is correct, is to do with binding. I did social anthropology. Social anthropology was a superb subject. A superb subject. Because I was accepted to do mathematics, and I wanted to know, I wanted to get the widest perspective of social dynamics, social things. And if I'd gone for any other discipline, it would have been biased by Western approach. And the whole point about social anthropology is that you go out of your society and you gauge other people and other cultures and other societies, and you find out they're thinking about things and doing things in completely different ways. And then and I remember the first year, and Alan Campbell saying the whole point about it was that when you come back to your own culture, you realize how different it is. Okay? It's like an embodied reflective experience. That's what ethnography is. You visit, and original ethnographies, Malinowski and Evans Pritchard and so on and so forth, they were studying the other person. Or Bateson. Bateson was a remarkable ethnography. Have a look at that. It's the closest to a scientific approach. And Bateson went on into psychology, coming up with the double bind psychological development, and many other things, okay, including assisting family therapy systems. His book, sorry, his book, Ecology of Mind, remains phenomenal. Okay, I mean, it was influential to me when I was doing social anthropology. Now, to actually go to a culture and to return, even conceptually, to read an ethnography and to think about one's own society, but to actually go to another society, to actually live with other people in the way that they're living, cannot help but provide a reflective condition in one's own action and one's own culture. So all anthropologists that go through this, basically, if you know any anthropologists, in fact you are anthropologists, you're an anthropologist, you know. And if you know any anthropologists, aren't they interesting? And so when I did it, and I was meant to be doing pure maths, I wasn't interested really in other people that much, in a way. I was, but not that much. I wasn't interested in other cultures as kind of like what they did, their cultural forms. I wasn't that interested in my cultural forms. I was interested in mathematics and I wanted to know about social, and so I approached it almost like in a mathematical way. And so in fact my dissertation was about the difference between logic and non-logic and how they related. But I did want to do a social science so that I could actually go out and not just sit there and study things in books, which I was actually made me fall asleep at university, libraries. But it forced me, because of the fieldwork, to go out and engage a bunch of people. And I ended up on the smallest island in the Azores called Corvo. I had something like 300 people, 360 people, I think it was, on that island. And I was warned not to go there because, to enter into a culture, another culture, is very difficult to do. And to do it on an island, island mentalities are very tight, so it's even harder to get into. But it was great. I loved it. I enjoyed it. And it wasn't that different. It's still European and Portuguese. My parents were Portuguese, so I could speak the language. So it wasn't that different. But the notion of small groups and relationships was something where I tried to mathematize in terms of social graphs, but also just the whole social engagement, which is very interesting. And one of the aspects of it, which I was never interested in, was identity. Never really that interested in self and identity. And the whole thing about religion was kind of moderately interesting to me, but not really. I was more interested in the psychosocial dynamics. So the different cultures having different religions was kind of interesting, but not that interesting. Levi-Strauss talking about myths, so people relating myths, which religions could be part of, and it reflects and it embodies certain psychic activities. So by describing characters doing things, it exercises that aspect of us, kind of cathartically, like Bertolt Brecht, but potentially positively. So it alters us by considering the behavior of other people in these extremely, usually in any kind of religious texts or any kind of religious stories, is usually selflessness, to overcome challenges, but to demonstrate helping others. Okay. So you're not going to get a particularly deep understanding from me regarding, or at least an erudite understanding of what current theories are or appreciation of religions. Yeah. All I'm doing is trying to describe one or two processes that are useful for us in order to experience our, for want of a better term, our spiritual condition. And the most interesting thing that I remember about social anthropology was that the notion of even concepts like time were Western, and other cultures had different conditions and understandings of time. And the basic understanding is it's not a linear thing, time, but a circular. like the seasons. Repeat. And so you translate that into some kind of spiritual sense, and we talk about reincarnation, okay, rebirth, and so on and so forth. But again, I was not that interested. I'm not interested in symbolic manipulations per se. I'm not interested in that as a metaphor, really. I'm interested in really how we did things. So there would be things like, I remember, okay, before I get into that. So when we're talking about even understanding of time, you can't ask questions like, well, what is your understanding of time? Because we've just reified it by saying time is a thing, because I think of it as being a clock. We kind of like go through it, and we've got our various understandings of getting on time, being on time, and so on and so forth. We're so thoroughly immersed in that notion that the idea of somebody else going, time, it's like a bias question. So how do they organize themselves? You know, how do they get to meetings? How do they meet, make decisions collectively? And it's basically things like, well, they just turn up. And the people who have turned up at a certain time, there's enough people, those are the right people, and the decision's made. Things like that. It's not that you're saying, you know, time, how do you use time? You don't even have that as a lens. So, you know, so things like that. And again, it was Alan Campbell that drew attention to that one. He wrote a book about it. Devoted his whole life engaging people in South America, the Amazon, and he wrote a couple of books. Incredible. But the kind of things that were missing were like, well, how do they have sex? You know, making love. Was there a thing? You know, how did they talk about relationships? What was a wife? And yes, there were some aspects of it in the ethnographies, but they were quite often kind of just social analyses. And because most of the people conducting this research were kind of buttoned up academics, you never quite got to that kind of graphic aspect. And I think they did in the 60s and 70s, but I never saw these I don't know, let's say more rough ethnographies. And even theorists at that time, Bourdieu was the last guy that I got at university, and he was talking about dispositions. We're talking about feelings, or automatic emotional responses to things. And that was a massive change to academia, to consider that people actually had these things. So, and considering I was kind of like a living human, breathing human being with love interests and, sexual desires and everything else, there was something happening in the translation through these ethnographies that weren't quite correlating to me. And all these terms about self and identity and all these terms, I was like, I'm not quite sure what they're referring to in my own existence. And so I think the social anthropology, studying it when you're young, referring to all these theories and things when you don't actually know what they are in your own existence, is a bit tricky. So I suspect, it's the kind of thing that maybe we should do a bit later. But anyway, I continued to be a social anthropologist. So when I ended up doing a bit of teaching, I was interested in social engagement, more like psychosocial dynamics. Probably should have done that at university. All this is a roundabout route to say that the academic route isn't that useful. Okay, and subsequently, I've gone back to university and tried to study ABC state, and mindfulness was one of the things that I was interested in, which influenced how I engage students. But adolescents in classrooms, the idea of approaching mindfulness in this, let's all quieten down, be very gentle and nice to each other, it's not going to happen in inner city London schools. So you have to go at the speed that the students are going at, and you have to kind of engage, and that'd be a form of engaged Buddhism. You have to engage with what is happening. And it's quite rough and ready. It's very fast. You have to do whatever's required. I was like a bricklayer, if you're going to follow any of the postmodern stuff. I just came up with things that were appropriate at the time to catch the mind of the students. And got some amazing results, because if you do manage to catch the mind of the students, which I did quite regularly, and collectively, interesting things occur. And I'm interested in the psychosocial dynamics between us. Okay, So I'm not interested too much in, going down the level of depth that Buddhists have talked about, or any of the enlightened people throughout history, various religions. It's more, I'm interested in psychosocial dynamics that happens concurrently. And there are some people that are really deep, okay, and it's like, great. But if they're too deep, the other people can't understand them, we have a problem. I think it's good to appreciate the people that are deep. We give them respect, and hopefully we learn from them. But I haven't pursued it too far, let's say. So with religion, I haven't, with academia, that hasn't been that much of a use to me. The mindfulness, if you look at current understanding of mindfulness, most of it treats it as an object, and so it's just studying something. And, there are a few academics that talk about, well, we're just extracting mindfulness from a social context, and the whole theoretical, philosophical, and psychosocial embeddedness of where mindfulness came from, i.e. Buddhism, in the various cultures of the East. And by just extracting this one thing, we're kind of ignoring aspects of that. It's kind of true. It's not just a funny little technique that we use. So I'm not going to promote any kind of mindfulness, okay? Although I think mindfulness, is a great thing. This zero social distancing, there's a couple of techniques that I'd like to share with you. And actually, the two that spring to mind are, one is from Descartes, and it's a bit unusual that I'm doing this, but Descartes, okay, and the next one is Fox, because I've got some experience of their text. This does not mean it's exclusively them, but I found those techniques to be useful, and it's common. Okay, Descartes, 1637, and his phrase, cogito ergo sum. Okay, and that for me was a very pithy statement that influenced me. Okay, and it I think related quite strongly to my explorations of Buddhism. And Fox, the light within. Okay, and that was round about the same period, 17th century. Okay, and these two independent, don't know how independent, individuals describe a process that seemed almost identical. And I just thought that was interesting. So that's what I want to share with you. But that process, that single process, which I shall describe, is what it's kind of the ladder, I guess, or some kind of technique for us to help us derive zero social distance. Are you starting to get an idea what zero social distance is? Again, it's not a definition. Okay, I'm not interested in a definition. However, it's the opposite of social distance. Okay, so where there is no social distance, where we are the same. Okay, and there's aspects within me, and there's aspects within you, and there's aspects within everybody else that is the same. And we're not talking about the fact that we might have the same kind of organs, like heart and lungs, biological organs. We're talking about right now, for example, when I'm talking, you're following the words, and it's not really the words, it's wording, and it's in time. And there's an aspect of the process in which we are experiencing time, which is identical. Okay. And that's why it gets complicated as to what it is and define it, because it is beyond our capacity to verbalize. Okay. Now I've got some theories as to why and how that exists, based on other things, and maybe I'll share some of that with you. But this particular section, I'm just going to share with you some Buddhist things. Okay, might get to that. That might be the next bit. Just to give you kind of like the ballpark as to where this space is. I'm just wondering, because I've kind of separated out the different systems, and as I said, this is the trickiest one, because we practice it, okay, we do it. And talking about it has a tendency to make it further away. Oh, he's talking about this, he's talking about that, and you're referring to some other thing that somebody else is saying. And that's kind of going further away than what I want. I mean, I've talked about academia and so on and so forth. You think, oh, it's going to be an academic blab. Not really, no. Okay, so the only people that are continuing to watch this are, for whatever reason, patient enough to go, I'm a human being, he's a human being. Okay, what's he saying? What is he relating to in my own experience? It's a bit more like reflexive reading and so on and so forth, but we're looking for a direction which goes towards this, a zero social distance. So I wrote this little booklet. Okay, a little bit more data, let's call it, information. So I did teaching for about 10 years, and then at the end of it, I realised I hadn't been able to change the system. Got amazing results with kids in classroom, but didn't change the system. I thought, right, I've had enough of that. But there was one little bit that I thought was useful, that I thought indicated something interesting about mathematics. I started pursuing that. Okay, I did that for a little while. Developed XQ, and that's the last thing I'm going to talk about because it's so far out. And in order, just before doing that kind of study of mathematics, I summarised my thinking in various booklets, and one of them was Buddhist. Buddhism is not. Okay, Buddhism is not. I kind of like the title. There are different. There's a bunch of things. Each paragraph alphabetically ordered, and there's a map. Okay, and the idea was that you look at the big things first. Buddhism is not, so you look at that one alphabetically, and then Buddhism is not is what it is. Oh, okay, and then starting point. Oh, okay, maybe I should start at the starting point. And so you choose, and then you go from one to another. On the map, each of the references within each paragraph in bold, so you can kind of jump around. So it's a network. Okay, so it's not a linear construction. So you kind of jump in, jump out. So introduction to Zen, catching Western mind. Can't remember what that's about. Future echoes. Oh, okay. Subjective tests. Ooh, nice. Fractal consciousness. Gosh, right. I wrote this over 10 years ago, so I don't know. However, there was a few texts in here that I put at the back of the book because I thought they were really interesting. They were the 3 texts that I came across, and that's what I'd like to share with you. So I'm not going to talk about my own ideas so much. I'm going to talk about, a couple of texts that, for whatever reason, landed. I mean, 3 texts, not 4, 52. I've extracted 3. 3. In like 20 years, 3 texts kind of found me. One of them, in fact, the order was slightly different than what I'm about to say. If I'm correct. Maybe not. I think the first one was Dzogchen. Okay, so the first one was Dzogchen. I'll talk about that. The 6 Vajra verses. The second one was Introduction to Zen. And the specific poem, Hakuin's Song of Meditation. So the first one's like from Tibetan Buddhism. The second one's from Zen Buddhism, Japanese. And the third is the Foundation of Mindfulness Sutra. Extracts from the Foundation of Mindfulness, which was taken from the back of a book by Thich Nhat Hanh. Okay, so that's Vietnamese Buddhism. And it's purported to be, a sutra, a lesson by the Buddha. So I want to go through these texts, just a few of them. The last one's a little bit too big, but I'm going to show you the level of detail that is described here. So I'm just going to pause this before going into this. So basically that's been a rough introduction. We're going to get to this probably last. So we'll talk about, I've done enough of an introduction about myself. Anything a little bit more about why we're going to learn this? I don't know, just might be helpful.